Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have James Dunavant. He's the CEO at Tend. James, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kevin. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm
Thanks
excited
for having me.
I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing at Tend is actually really innovative and cool. But maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. So I grew up somewhat in the middle of nowhere, in Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta, actually, a town of less than 100 people.
Oh, wow.
So we're in a suburb, you might call it, of the mighty metropolis of Rolling Fork, Mississippi, which has all of 2,500 people.
Wow.
But, home of the blues, there's a reason for that. One of the more impoverished areas of our country. And I say that just because I do think it's been impactful on my overall perspective and kind of what's, led me out of the Delta to do what I'm doing today in different ways.
Fascinating. Okay, so you went to university. What did you take and why?
Yeah, so I went to school in Mississippi, at Mississippi State, studied finance, actually intended at that point to go to law school. I went to law school for a day and then decided that I did not want to do that. And I would say for me, it turned out to be a very sound decision.
Why do you say that? Or what happened that day?
Well, before I went to law school this summer, I went on a hike on the Appalachian Trail. So we hiked like 500 miles. So that was a good thinking time about what you really want to do in life. My father was an attorney. So, some of that pursuit comes from what you're see from day one of your life. But just upon those reflections, really much more interested in business, becoming involved in kind of the broader commerce, but even more specifically, I had always a natural interest in the financial system. Learned about a bit about that in undergrad. And so really went on the pursuit, made the decision that the parents were not happy with about finding things where I could just kind of pursue intellectual curiosity, right? So coming out of the Delta, I got my first job. This is what I don't talk about a whole lot, but I think it's interesting, actually, as a mortgage broker in Nashville, Tennessee. And so this was pre-crisis, right? Pre the 08-09 collapse, which, the mortgage industry at that point in time was quite formative for the way things played out. So I did that for just a year. But from a consumer finance standpoint, seeing both the positives and certainly some of the negatives, the first kind of touch of some of these things seemed unsustainable. I think it was a very good experience to me. And then it kind of led me to do a 180 in some regards. So I went from being a mortgage broker to becoming a regulator at the Federal Reserve.
Interesting.
So seeing some of those learnings, I thought it would be good, one, to be more a part of the formation of the system, but also learn about that. As a bank examiner, I worked across more than, I think, 70 financial institutions. And that turned out to be a fairly formative period as well, because you kind of had the setup, and then I went into the crisis as a bank regulator. So got to go through a couple of failed bank exercises where we would declare an institution in Georgia and Atlanta and one in Miami critically undercapitalized. So again, many real-time learnings about the way all these things kind of come together. And I think, good context in terms of, what the next pursuit might be.
Interesting. Okay. So how did you become CEO of Tend, and what exactly is it?
Yeah. So going from the Fed, I left there, actually went to New York. At that
Okay.
point in time, wanted to become an institutional investor. Um,
Oh,
and
interesting.
it's further kind of on this path of what can I go do where you can kind of pursue intellectual curiosity and then find opportunities from that. And so I felt like investing would be a good avenue. So went to Columbia Business School, the home of value investing, Warren Buffett. Also, just from a personal growth perspective, felt that New York would be a good place to be. So did Columbia and then spent a couple of years as an investment banker. Then
Okay.
became a institutional investor first at a hedge fund called Pine River Capital, and we invested globally across financial services. And that's where I got my first touch of emerging markets. So, we looked at banks in Russia, for instance. We looked at a number of different opportunities in Latin America. So that
Wow.
kind of extended my thinking out a bit, but was there for a very short time, and then became um, a private equity investor at the Ford Financial Fund, which is run by Gerald Ford, one of the more renowned investors in the bank space. And we took control positions in banks, so we ran the banks. So I
Wow.
spent 6 years there, where we basically, um, you know, spent a lot of time in California. Most specifically, we had a platform that was a $3 billion really community bank, and then transformed that into a $20 billion statewide institution. And it was really that period of time that it kind of formulated my interest in, kind of taking the step into financial technology. You had a few different things happen during that period. The first is, open banking within the US actually became viable, right, from a
Right.
regulatory standpoint, and also uh, the ability to connect all the dots through digital experiences. And then you also had the increasing kind of utility of the broader fintech ecosystem. And so we had some conventional brick and mortar banks and began to transform those into more direct digital experiences for people. During that time, you also had kind of this emergence of the frontier, right? So with more truly distributed democratic financial ecosystem. So with digital assets, right, we had the kind of birth and emergence of Bitcoin
Right.
in that broader world. And so, one, day to day, we were applying many of these open banking solutions in our conventional model. I became increasingly immersed and obsessed with many of these frontier, you know, promises for the future, and all of that period kind of led me into the realization that, you know, these models fundamentally do need to change. There's a lot of opportunity there to certainly better serve people, right?
Sure.
Um, but then also really just change the overall construct of what it is to provision financial services. So just kind of coming to those conclusions, it's like, all right, well, I've got to dive in. And so that high level overview led us to me jumping into Tend, right, which started at the beginning of last year in terms of setting the foundation. So we
Okay.
started in February of last year. And the intention is really to develop a membership based model for people so that we can be a curator of a broad set of financial solutions, right, that really gets to the core competency of what it means to leverage open systems, to also provide access, but take membership as far as it can go, right? So that people are not just getting quality tools and best value, but also have an empowered voice and a co creation element to the platform that aligns with what we're seeing on the frontier. This strong secular movement to people really have an expectation, a need to have more empowerment to drive the solutions that they're using. And so that, in essence, is the birth of Ken in terms of just what the overall vision might be.
Got you. No, fascinating. So how did you come up with the idea and actually decide to go for it, though?
Well, so the bank that we had in California was heavily retail focused, right? So you see a lot of just the common consumer circumstance there. We see who we did serve well within that market, and then by omission, where the bank is not serving well. As you know, California is heavily Hispanic. We had a bank that was not necessarily focused in the heavily Hispanic markets, but when you look at the population set there, there's a recognition that there is some degree of underserving, right?
Okay.
And so decided, I mean, I've always kind of been a research oriented person to dig into that further. And you recognize that there is a real need, right? So if you look at the Hispanic market in the US, 43% are underbanked or unbanked, relative to 17% for the majority. And then those that are banked typically pay, 3 times the fees of the majority. And so it's really looking at where can you add the most value in a meaningful community. And then it's also true if you look at just the prospects for the future from a demographic standpoint, the growth of the overall Hispanic community is probably going to be the largest contributor to U.S. economic growth over the next 20 years, right? So there is a community that you can offer the most value to, that also has a very promising and ascending future where you can go and accommodate that future. But then looking further into it from there, you get into Mexico, right? Because that's a natural touch point to be able to connect people, where we do have significant financial inefficiency between connecting financially across borders. And so digging into that, suddenly, came to the conclusion that there is a broader open space there to serve people and provide them access in Mexico than what we have in the U.S., where we can provide a formidable offering. And what you also see there is a very, very strong interest and early adoption rates for fintech solutions, whereas the conventional banking system has not been used, right? You have 90% cash-based transactions. But putting those two pieces together, you form, all right, so from a competitive standpoint, how do we come to an overall platform that has true distinction? And you recognize making the full connection, so completely serving both markets with a full service banking solution and then the ability to move money is something that's not out there today, right? So I think we have a distinction to be that neobank that can focus and connect people between the U.S. and Mexico and provide them one coherent experience to be able to transact, right? Hold money, move money together, and then, as we've talked about with some of the social overlays, even be able to socially interact.
No, interesting. Yeah, it's completely fascinating to me how complicated it is to move money to another country, or how complicated it can be, right? No matter what bank you use or how well you're set up.
No doubt, no doubt. And from a digital solution standpoint, it's not that complicated, but you do have regulatory barriers that can be multifaceted, right? So the first is simply having the licenses, but then it's also getting a cash inflow all the way into the system and out on the other side. And you've got a lot of different types of licensing and complexities that need to be coordinated. And just, as I mentioned, over the past few years, you've really been able to seamlessly do that from a digital experience, but it's still early. And there are still many things to be solved for. So for us, what we can do, because we do have the full ability to provide a banking solution on both sides, and we have bank partners with their charters, we can leverage that and then allow those two banks to directly interact, right, through our messaging system. So the intradaily activity is accounted for. And then from a currency standpoint, we can go more to a wholesale solution to do an end of day clearing type solution, which for the user simply brings down the cost, right? While at the same time, we're making that very user friendly. So it's real time because of that coordination between the two institutions and our technology.
Fascinating. So you touched on something a few minutes ago that I want to dive a little bit deeper on so I understand it better, is people that are underserved in the banking world pay more in fees. Is that just because anything they want to do, they have to go to a bank that's probably not their own bank, maybe because they don't have a bank account, and that bank just charges them kind of an arm and a leg just to do a simple service? Or what's the rationale behind that?
That is a piece of it, right? Less are setting up primary account relationships, and so they're going to get higher transaction costs, right? Because they're coming in more as a one-off, as opposed to having that balance out with some of, perhaps providing a balance to the bank, which delivers economics. But then it's also just having a general lack of competitiveness within banking in underserved communities. If you go to a place where the demographics are upper income, you've got a significant amount of solutions. In these other markets, there are going to be less options and less competition, and so the prices in general are just going to structurally be higher, right?
Got you. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the features and services you offer, because I think
Right.
it's actually really innovative. So do you want to dive into, maybe let's start talking about some of the services you offer and the rewards and benefits that Tend actually does and gives to their users?
For sure. So we are a membership model, right? Which
Okay.
means that there is an upfront, transparent subscription. That, in our view, aligns us with the consumer to be a more sustainable relationship, right? So transparently what our economics are, and then that empowers us to go and lower the cost of all of the other services that we deliver. So we're not a transaction monetization model, right? With that, though, clearly for people to have be compelled to sign up for a membership model, you need a critical mass of value add.
Right.
So our general view is that the fintech ecosystem is now at that point where you can bring that value add to the table. The first piece is you need to have tangible returns on activities. So we've got a suite of core solutions to hold your money. So a transaction account, a savings account, um, ability to do peer-to-peer domestically, which is live today, but then a broad rewards ecosystem behind that. So you've got, deep cash back rewards for shopping across a lot of different retailers. That's live in the US and Mexico. In the US, that's more, I think, of a table stakes. It would absolutely be necessary for us to have that type of model. In Mexico, it's a new thing in many ways. To have a nice deep inventory of rewards is something that you don't see a lot. And we were able to basically leverage our partnerships from the US and bring them cross border to provide something that's going to be better than the alternatives in the market.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And that's, we always want to think about from our vantage point, how can we cross pollinate, right? To
Sure.
really add value in the markets. And so we'll want to do more of that. But then you can book travel on the platform. So global travel bookings, we actually have access to wholesale rates and can pass those economics on to our members. And so they're going to get better price than if they were to go to Expedia or any of the other retail aggregators, and then also get cash back to take on their trip. And then there's access to deep discounts, right? So it's just the aggregation of all the couponing out there. And the basic idea there is to simply be able to put best value in people's hands as they go through their daily activities, and then ultimately provide a tangible value proposition, a return on what they're paying for the subscription. And so we'll continue to deepen that inventory. I think our priorities for getting into 2022 is to make that more proactive and personalized. And so we're starting off with more of an inventory type model, but really we need to be able to deliver that benefit to you as you go through your life, right? So if you walk into Home Depot, we need to let you know that you've got an opportunity to save and then get that to you immediately upon checking out. So that'll be an important thing for us, other than just continuing to deepen that inventory. In terms of just rounding out the product set and what Tend is, we also have some complementary insurance in the product. So it's just a small term life policy. That is a foreshadowing of our intention to roll out a full line of insurance offerings for both US and Mexico. And it'll be, basic things. So more term life, but then home, auto, renters insurance. And then as we fill that out, we'll get into some, more niche solutions for our markets that we serve, and things like gig economy and whatnot. So that's the basic product set at the start, and certainly that will broaden as we go through the next year or so, pretty meaningfully. But then you also have the social side, right? So I mentioned that we're intending to build a community-driven platform, and so the starting point for that is what we call the Green. And so this is a social forum. In its beginning stage, is intended to deliver content, and it's content based on the principles of financial education. And so we have, a small army of very talented writers that we really free up to write on things around money that are compelling and interesting to them through more of a storytelling model. So if you think about financial education today, there's actually no shortage of financial education inventory. If you go to the CFPB, I mean, there's a tremendous library of anything you could want to study, and it's very high quality. The issue is that people don't actively engage, right, in the
Right.
financial literacy experience. And so we want to put it in a form that it is compelling. It's interactive. It's through storytelling of other individuals that share in similar circumstances, so that people are really building kind of that rote mindfulness to better live their financial lives. So that's the starting point for the Green. We'll get that out and cultivate a conversation through the public channels, and then we'll have the ability to have conversation inside of our platform. So message boards, chat rooms. That's the starting point. What we'll also be doing is bringing out a number of different interactive tools so that people might be able to see where they are in their financial circumstance relative to many different benchmarks, perhaps within the community, but then also empowering people to be able to determine really where Tend goes from here. And so we'll do things like publish our roadmap, right? What we intend to build over the course of the next year, call it, and then provide voting mechanisms so that our members can consciously tell us what the priorities should be. And we'll be doing a lot of other, co-creation efforts like that as we go through it, ultimately to put as much power within the community's hands as we possibly can for the platform. And then last piece I'll say there, so you have the product side, you have the social experience, then we have what I think really connects the platform is our revenue sharing model, right? So empower the voice, provide people best value for different needs, empower them to be able to determine where we're going, but people should also receive rewards for their actions in a perpetual form. And so that's the 10 shares concept, right? So our members can take particular actions and they will get a percentage of the recurring revenue of Tend itself. So examples would be if someone signs up for a direct deposit, they get their first 10 share. So that's a commitment to make this a primary relationship. If they invite friends, family, as long as they are current and active on the platform, they would receive 10 shares for that. And it's really, just providing every touch point that you possibly can to enable a community-driven platform.
Fascinating. And basically, none or very, very few financial institutions are basically offering these types of programs and incentives. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. As far as I know, and I try to study it as closely as I can. As you know, things are always changing.
Sure.
But for referrals, people do cash bonuses. That's very common,
Right.
sometimes substantial. The distinction is really providing that ongoing set of economics and providing that commitment to doing so.
No, and I also think the fact that you're allowing your members to vote on your roadmap is really quite different. I've worked with people that have worked in the banking space, and I've done a little bit in my past, and it's just trying to get even something simple into an app to do something basic and offer some sort of reward can be quite challenging. Never mind allowing your users to kind of dictate potentially where you go, I think is
Right.
actually really innovative.
And it's really all about reintroducing like conscious decisions,
Right.
into products, um, and providing accountability to us to do that. We can have the roadmap that galvanizes what our priorities should be. We could certainly go and do things that are over and above that, but at the end of the day, we know we have a certain tangible level of accountability to, the members that we're serving.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense and is actually really cool. So I know, and I would even say this about myself, I think a lot of people, financial literacy isn't probably their strong suit.
Right.
So what advice or things do you kind of see often that you could actually tell people to maybe like demystify a little bit? Because sometimes it's not really that complicated, but it can be so daunting and overwhelming. So what advice or things do you see all the time that you wish people didn't do?
That I wish people didn't do.
Or did do more of, I suppose.
I think it, for me, is more about creating the right delivery of information for people, and the fact that we've not done a good job through various businesses,
Okay.
and doing that, right? And so, um, there is always an opportunity to proactively, pursue mindfulness about anything that you have in life. But on many things, we pursue things because, um, we're naturally interested in them. Well, for most people, their financial circumstance honestly is not something that they're excited at looking into further.
Ah,
You have
interesting.
70% that live paycheck to paycheck,
Right.
in this country. That's a very real thing. So to me, um, people can always take additional steps, but I think our focus is on trying to deliver us an experience where it is naturally compelling, to find out more about the financial realm, you know.
Interesting. So it's a totally different approach than how it's traditionally done, right? Yeah, it never really thought of it like that. If you're just worried about making sure the bills are paid every month, you're not really trying to look about how to get better at it. You're like that's kind of so far down the checklist in your financial kind of world. Is that fair to say then?
I think so. I think so. And if you look at financial services and the way that advice has historically been provisioned, you do have perhaps this top down, we understand the financial world, and we will show you the way. And that's certainly very suitable for many different circumstances. But by and large, if you just look at overall financial health, financial education for the mass population, you don't see advancement. And so you have to look again at that model, and adjust it. And so our adjustment is, rather than be a top-down provision or of advice, it's more about empowering other people's voices to share their experiences, their real life experiences around money. So that's naturally engaging and compelling, and people can learn from one another, in their interactions, as opposed to, a hard educational progression. I think we will do a lot to create interactive content for those that want to explore, the pure content of financial literacy. But the most important thing for me is to create, a critical mass of good stories, of relatable content, so that people can, leverage one another's experiences.
Got you. No, interesting. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into the app, the debit card, and
Mhm.
how, like, because you guys don't have any like physical banking locations, correct?
That's correct.
So how do I, like, if I want to take out money, like how does that work, and how do I actually use my Visa debit card and the mobile app? Like, walk us through kind of maybe the average user or day of, just maybe doing some of the traditional stuff where you want physical money,
For
and then
sure.
doing some more of the digital kind of stuff, or just paying contactless.
Yeah, for sure. So the first, step is, if 10 is compelling, go to the website, check it out, get a good full download of what the overall experience is. But then the first step is going to be to download the app, right? And so you
Right.
just go through a quick onboarding journey. That's going to get your card ordered and sent to you, wherever you are.
Okay.
And so then through the app, you're going to have a nice dashboard of all of the things that we mentioned, so you can take advantage of rewards or take a look at your, overall transaction activity. And then with the debit card, just like any other debit card in the U.S., it's a Visa debit card. We have a network of ATMs. So if you want to go, and get money from over 36,000 locations, that would be free, right?
Oh,
So that
awesome.
allows you to kind of interact on the cash side of things. Um, and then, a very nice amenity for us is we have the ability for people to send money to one another. And so if you've got friends, family that want to come in and have that experience, the ability to interact is really quite seamless in that regard too.
Interesting. Okay. So I want to talk about some of the other services that people can actually do in the app.
Yeah. So as you come in, you've got your home screen and it gives you, a collective view, right? So
Okay.
we are always going to have a suite of things. So instead of a tile orientation, we want to be able to sum that up. So you've got a nice intuitive way to look at your overall circumstance. So we've got at the top what's called the circle, and you can see, the difference between your amount in checking or your transaction account versus your savings account. We've also got a line of credit that people can utilize to build credit. So it shows that all in one form. And then people have access to their credit score, as well on that home screen. We will be enabling in the first quarter the ability to click through there and see your credit score, as well as some credit monitoring tools. If you go from that, then the next piece is moving money, right? So you've got a lot of different things. If you want to connect bank accounts, if you want to do bill pays, kind of like single click to get your recurring bill pay set up for Netflix, that kind
Right.
of thing. And then you've got your rewards page. And so that's where you can go through, see feature offers. If you want to dive into local offers, you've got kind of the, geo location orientation of what might be convenient to you. And then you've got travel. And so you can go into the travel solution and look at all the flights available, hotels, rental cars, even experiences, and basically book all those things. You can see the degree of savings that we'll provide. And so it's really kind of a full service solution there. And that's a global capability. And
Very cool.
then the third thing is you've got the discounts, right? So all the 50, 60% off offerings that are out there. We've got a daily inventory of, 250,000 deals, where at this point we're just intending to get those that might be the most useful to you and kind of a feature offer for
Got you. Very cool.
them.
So
Yeah,
how does it yeah, it seems like the whole app, you basically do everything in the app, and I think, let's be honest, it's very rare that most people need to actually go into a physical bank these days, especially for most things, right?
right.
So I'm curious, are you going to expand to other countries outside of the US and Mexico eventually, or are you guys just going to try to stay in those two countries?
I think the architecture of the platform is one that can be carried, to additional geographies. But I would say a big but, we have nothing or we have plenty to focus on, within U.S. and Mexico population. I mean, you're talking about, 120 plus million people that we could
Wow.
potentially serve well. I think it'll take us quite some time to feel like we've reached our full potential on that focus. So it's not something that I think about a whole lot at this
Right.
stage, other than the fact that, we're trying to build a truly personalized app that when you serve millions of people and provision a broad set of financial services, it allows for that scalability across many different types of users, but also geographies. So,
Sure. So I'm curious to maybe just like step back a little bit. How did you come up with the idea or decide to be kind of so innovative in a space that, for lack of a better term for it, isn't really known for innovation? I think it's becoming better in the fintech space, but
mhm.
how did you kind of just decide to go for it? Because that had to have been very daunting at the beginning.
Yeah, the biggest inspiration to me, honestly, is more about what's happening on the frontier of financial technology
Okay.
with these distributed democratic systems, cryptocurrencies. I think the emergence of that is a very powerful secular transformation that we'll see unfold over the rest of our lives in many ways. It's that recognition that also I think helped me to dimension where we are, and in the
Right.
progression. It's really very much first innings, right?
Right.
And in the digital transformation. And so, because of that, so much promise that's still left to be untapped. And so that's really to me the crux of the inspiration, as well as just seeing um, the untapped potential in the way the conventional models serve people. You know,
Right.
if you go to the conventional intermediary banking model, right, the natural incentive is you would want to accumulate capital, right? So for a bank account, large balances, and then reprovision that to needers of capital, so through loans, and collect a spread. Going back to what I mentioned, about 70% of people living paycheck to paycheck, the balances that people are serving the banks with, and then on top of that low interest rate environment, provides a poor economic circumstance for banks to serve them well, right? And so then they need to
Ah,
come up with other ways to capture economics. And that's where we've gotten into one, many people, the banks not being necessarily incentivized to serve well, but then when they do, oftentimes instituting a financial model that's not necessarily constructive to the consumer. So taking advantage of poor mental accounting to insert fees when you make bad decisions, or perhaps just provisioning, what's on your balance sheet by the way of loans. So whether you may or may not need that, our incentive is to provide you really as much of those as we possibly could, keeping in mind credit risk. Um, that basic model has limitations. When you look at open systems, it changes that tremendously, right? Um, I'm no longer incentivized just to provide you what I have in my close inventory. I can tap an entire global ecosystem in some ways to get you what you need. And so that's where we want to make sure that we're doing that well, right? So it's a curation engine to be able to tap into a broad ecosystem to get people what they need in a more natural way. And getting back to the membership model, do it in a way where our economic construct is aligned with them being able to move forward in a good fashion.
fascinating. No, I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. But how have you found trying to build some of those relationships with some of the more traditional institutions? Was it challenging? Were they pretty open to it? A little bit of both? Or how has that experience been?
I think there's a good deal of openness, still plenty of challenges
Okay.
sorting through it. The regulatory construct for a fintech as a service platform, for instance, is still very much in the early stage. So everyone having very clear guidelines as to what should be done. Um, is in some form of a flux, right? So
Okay.
that creates challenges that continue to get more clear, I think, every day. And then there's just this increasing recognition that this is really where people need to play from a competitive standpoint. And so you have many that are now stepping forward.
Right.
Um, in the US, you do have a highly competitive banking system, right? So people are always going to push toward what that next new thing might be in some way. With 5,500 banks, you're going to have a nice set of solutions. I would say the construct in Mexico is much different, right? It's a much more consolidated oligopoly type um, industry construct, and the willingness to step forward from an innovation standpoint may be a bit less. Um, I'd say from a regulatory standpoint, it's actually very similar to the U.S., which is good. It allows us to be able to navigate it. But it's much more important there, I think, to find a really strong partner that is with you in mindset, that has the commitment to carry things forward. And that really gives you some advantages because it is a barrier to entry more so. And it could just be that it's earlier a bit as well, but I think it has mostly to do with the overall competitive dynamics.
Fascinating. Interesting. So I'm curious, and I'm always fascinated by this because you let your users dictate part of your roadmap. And sure, they might actually say they vote for a handful of features that really they think is going to make sense for them. How do
Mhm.
you actually manage that to say, like, you know what, maybe that is a good fit, or maybe that's not a good fit? Because balancing that sometimes can be very tricky.
No question. And so the responsibility on our side is to listen first to actions, right? So what
Okay.
people are doing, and then our planning, our representation of what that roadmap should be provides, I think, all of the um, you might call it subconscious actions type listening. We just want to take that final step where we're also applying consciousness.
Right.
Now, I will say we also have this opportunity for people to inject new ideas. And if
Okay.
they reach a quorum, then we'll build those as well. But with that, I think the key there is what is the right mechanism for quorum so that you know right offhand you have a nice set of active users that have definitive interest in even entertaining those things that where we have not necessarily applied all of the you know proper listening formation tools.
Oh, interesting. So I'm curious, what advice do you give to people that are looking to get into the fintech space? Because you've obviously had a bunch of success. You
Mhm.
guys have signed some really good partnerships. You have a bunch of people using the app. But what advice do you give to people that you maybe wish you would have known earlier on in your career that you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you've got all of the customer facing platforms, right? So a lot of
Right.
visibility, and they're immense in the U.S. for sure. So there are a lot of immediate options there, but then under the surface, you've got a much larger ecosystem of fintech providers that ultimately enable those consumer experiences. So I think it's really um, healthy to go through and research a lot of the frontline platforms and understand what their ecosystem really looks like, how it's constructed. I think you'll find additional opportunities there, but it's also from an educational standpoint. So as you get that opportunity to perhaps interview, you really understand the structure and function a little bit better, which, we're all figuring those things out as this thing evolves. And so that will be, I think, a compelling touch point for evaluation.
Interesting. No, that's fascinating. So I'm curious, we're kind of coming to the end of the show. Is there anything else that you want to mention about Tend uh, to kind of close out the show, and where people can get more information?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, as we had talked about, connecting people with real-time money transfer between the U.S. and Mexico is 1A for us. So we're intending to bring that live for people by the end of the year. Okay. We're squarely into implementation mode, but we're very excited about that. And then the second thing that we're working on that's going to really be an increasing part of the overall experience is a concept that we call Rio. And so Rio is a personal smart assistant that we'll have in the platform that's intended to just be able to deliver the things that you need through a conversational interface, through a human interface throughout the experience. So we'll be introducing Rio in the next couple of months. And the first form is going to be through the onboarding process. So as opposed to going through a typical application progression, you'll be introduced to Rio at the beginning and go through more of a dynamic conversation. So we're really excited about that, what that's going to do to allow us to ultimately be this really good curator of a lot of different things down into a simple mobile experience. But I guess that's it in terms of the main kind of priorities of the moment.
No, that's amazing, and that's really cool that you guys are building that. So let's close the show then with mentioning where people can get more information about Tend and any other links you want to mention.
Yeah, for sure. So Tend.money is the place to go just to check out what we're doing. Hopefully download the app, give it a test run. That's it. We've also got the social channels. We're going to be increasingly active across all of them that you might touch. So Twitter, Tend Money, Instagram is the same. So check us out there as well.
Perfect, James. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
You too. Appreciate it, Kevin.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.